When the high priest would come into the holy place for the morning services, first of all, he would come here to the candlesticks. And these candlesticks were made of a talent of solid gold. He would pour the oil in each one of them, in all 7 bowls, because these candlesticks were to never go out. They were to be continually burning. And the candlesticks, they had each one, it was beaten out of gold. They had a knop and a flower on each of the 7 branches. The high priest would then trim the wicks to make sure that each one of these candles stayed lit for the whole day. And after this, he would come here to the altar of incense. And this altar was made of acacia wood overlaid with gold. He would put incense on the coals, and the coals were taken from the altar of burnt sacrifice. This incense was a special incense. It was to not be used anywhere other than inside the sanctuary. And then the high priest, as he was walking out, you notice that he walks by the table of showbread. It was also made of acacia wood overlaid with gold, and there were 12 loaves of bread on top of it. The priest would come, and they would bring 12 loaves on the Sabbath day, and they would eat the 12 loaves that had been there for a whole week. After this, the high priest, he would then go back out into the courtyard, and the daily services would begin.
Now that the high priest has finished his work in the holy place, it's time now to open up this courtyard for the common person as they bring in their offerings. So as you see, as they come into the gate of the courtyard, and he's met by the priest. The priest then takes them on over into the courtyard, there to the north side of the altar, where they're going to transfer the sin from the sinner to the lamb. And at that point is where we're going to see the lamb being killed, and we'll see that the sin is now going to be transferred into the holy place. This is important because God needs to separate man from sin, because he loves us and he hates sin, and he needs to do that separation for us. That's what you're going to find here in the sanctuary service. So at this time, David would see the importance of this when he would say, "Enter into my gates with thanksgiving and into my courts with praise."
Now, once in the courtyard, on the north side, the priest would have the Israelite kneel down and place his hands on the head of the lamb. At that time, he'd be confessing his sin to God. As he did this, his sin was symbolically being transferred from him onto the lamb. Then the priest would hand the sinner the two-edged sword to slit the throat of the lamb. As the sinner did this, the priest would catch some of the blood in a bowl. Then the priest and the sinner would cut the lamb in the way designed by God. After that, the sinner could leave and he could be free from sin. Then the priest, would continue on to the laver, where he'd wash his hands and feet. Now the laver was made from the looking glasses of the women. It was of pure brass. The water in the laver was provided by God through the rock. Now after the priest would wash his hands and feet, he would take the lamb and the blood to the altar of sacrifice. The altar of sacrifice was made of a solid piece of wood, shittim wood, and it was overlaid with brass. The grid inside was made of solid brass. It was 5 cubits square, and it was 3 cubits tall. On each corner had 1 horn. Now after he'd go to the altar of sacrifice, he would sprinkle the blood on each of the 4 horns of the altar, after he'd placed the lamb on there. Then he would then go back to the laver, where he'd wash his hands and feet again before entering into the holy place.
As you can see here, the priest is now washing his hands in the laver. That was important because they could not have dust on their hands and feet as they entered into the holy place. That represented sin. That is the way it is with you and I today. You and I, as we are working as priests for God here on this earth, we too need to take serious our responsibility in our work, and we need to be right with God as well.
Here in the holy place, when the priest would come in with the bowl of blood, he would go past the table of showbread and past the candlesticks directly to the altar of incense, where he would put the blood on the 4 horns of the altar and sprinkle it before the veil. This was representing the sins of the people, the Israelites, when they would bring their sacrifice to the courtyard. And this was representing their sins being recorded here before the veil. After that, the priest would go back out into the courtyard, where he would meet the next sinners as they were coming to bring their sacrifice.
This is the most holy place. This is the place that the high priest would enter, and he could only enter into that apartment only 1 day a year, on the Day of Atonement, on the Yom Kippur, or the cleansing of the sanctuary. This is where the work is going forward now in the heavenly sanctuary above. This is the most holy place.
The Day of Atonement was a very important day to the Israelites. On this day, God specifically instructed them that they were to do no work, they were to fast, and they were to search their hearts and afflict their souls, to make sure that there was no sin in their life which they had not confessed. Because on this day, all of the sins recorded in the holy place would be forever erased. So on this day, the high priest would be the only one who was working here in the entire sanctuary. He would have 2 goats, and he would cast lots to determine which goat would be the Lord's and which would be the scapegoat. The Lord's goat he would kill, and he would place it upon the altar of sacrifice. Then he would come into the holy place with the bowl of blood, where he would pick up a censer and take some hot coals from off the altar of incense. Then, as he came under the veil, he would place a handful of incense upon the hot coals, and this would create a smoke. Now he would come before the Ark of the Covenant, where he would sprinkle the blood 7 times upon the mercy seat and 7 times on the ground before the Ark. This was to make atonement for all of the sins recorded throughout the entire year. In his hands he would also be holding the censer, which had the smoke of the incense ascending up out of the censer. And this would be a symbol of the prayers of the Israelites as they were searching their hearts on this day. But there would come a time when his work in the sanctuary had come to a close. So he would cast the censer to the ground and he would say, "It is finished." Then he would go back under the veil, where he would pause at the altar of incense and touch the 4 horns of the altar with the blood. Then he would go back into the courtyard where the scapegoat was tied. Here he would place his hands upon the head of the scapegoat and transfer all of the sins recorded from the sanctuary onto the head of the scapegoat, which would then be led out in the wilderness to die of natural causes. Now at the time when his work was finished, if there was any of the Israelites who had not searched their hearts, who had neglected to do this work given to them by God, they would be cut off from among the children of Israel. But for all of those who sincerely searched their hearts and sincerely did the work that God had given to them, they would be right with God.
As you have seen now, all the services dealing with the courtyard has to do with the time in which Jesus was on this earth. And that has come to an end because Jesus has already died on the cross. He is now ascended to heaven, where he sat on the right hand of the Father. And John sees him in the holy place in Revelation 1 when he's there at the table of showbread and he hears a voice behind him. He turns to the one that speaks to him and he sees Jesus walking among the candlesticks. We see that that time is when Jesus is in the holy place. But like we said in the service on this earth, like we said, that was a daily service. It happened every day. But there's one day and one day alone, and that the high priest would go into the next apartment, which is the most holy place. That day has to begin in heaven. In fact, as we study through the Bible, we come to a Bible prophecy in Daniel that foretells the time in which Christ will move into the most holy place. And now we can see today, as we follow that timeline out, that we are living in that particular day, the Day of Atonement. As the children of Israel were outside of the curtain, all around the sanctuary on that particular day on earth, you and I need to be looking at what they did. They searched their hearts because they knew at the time that the censer was placed down, if they had not transferred their sins into the holy place, most holy place, they would be forever cut off from the children of Israel. They would die. So it is with us today. Right now, you have Christ standing in front of the Father. They're standing together right now. But there's going to come a day that Christ is going to say those words that you hear in Revelation. It is finished. He's going to take that censer that he has. He's going to cast it to the earth. And he's going to make that statement in a loud voice. Let those that are righteous be righteous still. And let those that are be filthy still. And then he's going to walk out of the holy place, most holy place, into the holy place, where there he meets these angels. Each one of the angels will receive a vial off the candlesticks and be given to the angel, and the angel is going to fly out of the temple of heaven and pour it upon the earth in the form of a plague. You see, one by one, the 7 last plagues is poured upon the earth. And you and I, once the censer has been placed down, our fate has been sealed. We're either just or unjust. And if Christ has left the most holy place and that plagues are falling, where do we go? Where do we go? See, Christ has promised to write his law upon our hearts and our minds. And that's the desire that we have in showing this sanctuary here, is to let people know what Christ is doing right now so they too can do what the children of Israel did of old, search their hearts and see what there is in their hearts they need to transfer to the heavenly sanctuary above, and allow the miracle above all miracles to happen in their lives, where God takes and writes upon their hearts and their minds the Word of God.